Story 1. The Endless Refuel. Marcus Whitfield had been a professional truck driver for 23 years, hauling freight across the American Southwest with a reputation for reliability and efficiency. The 51-year-old from Arizona knew every truck stop, every diesel pump, every quirk of the routes he ran between Phoenix and El Paso. On a blistering July night in 2019, Marcus pulled into what appeared to be a standard truck stop outside Las Cruces, New Mexico, to top off his fuel before the final stretch home. He would spend the next 14 hours trapped in a nightmare loop, refueling the same tank over and over, watching the same attendant repeat the same actions, unable to break free from a pocket of time that had folded in on itself like origami made from moments instead of paper. The truck stop appeared suddenly in Marcus's headlights, a medium-sized facility with 8 diesel pumps, a convenience store, and a small diner. Marcus didn't recognize it from his hundreds of previous runs through this area, but new truck stops opened occasionally and he needed fuel. His gauge showed a quarter tank, enough to reach Phoenix, but cutting it closer than Marcus liked. He pulled up to pump number 4 and climbed out into the oppressive heat, even at 11 p.m. still radiating from the pavement in waves that distorted the air. A young attendant approached, maybe 25 years old, wearing a standard uniform shirt and an eager smile. "Evening, sir. Fill her up?" "Yeah, diesel, thanks." Marcus handed over his fleet card and walked toward the convenience store to grab coffee while his tank filled. The store was clean, well-stocked, playing generic pop music at low volume. Marcus filled a large coffee, grabbed a pack of beef jerky, and returned to the counter. The clerk rang him up, 8:47. Marcus paid and walked back outside. His truck was still fueling, the numbers on the pump climbing steadily. The young attendant stood nearby watching the flow. Marcus checked his watch. 11:13 p.m. The fuel should be done in another minute or two. He sipped his coffee and looked out at the desert darkness beyond the truck stop's lights, enjoying the brief respite from driving. The pump clicked off. The attendant removed the nozzle, replaced it on the pump, and smiled at Marcus. "All set, sir. Have a safe trip." Marcus climbed back into his cab, started the engine, and glanced at his fuel gauge. It showed a quarter tank, exactly what it had shown before refueling. Marcus frowned and looked back at the pump, but the digital readout clearly showed he'd taken on 187 gallons, more than enough to fill his 250-gallon tank from a quarter full. Marcus climbed back out. "Hey, there's something wrong. My gauge still shows a quarter tank after fueling." The attendant's smile never wavered. "That's strange, sir. Would you like me to fill it again?" "I just filled it. The gauge should show full, not a quarter." "Would you like me to fill it again?" the attendant repeated, his tone and inflection identical to the previous statement, as if reading from a script. Marcus felt the first stirrings of unease. He looked at his watch. 11:13 p.m., the same time as before. That couldn't be right. He'd been walking around, fueling, shopping for at least 15 minutes. His watch must have stopped. He pulled out his phone to check the time. 11:13 p.m. "Yeah, okay, fill it again. Something's definitely wrong with my gauge." Marcus wanted to investigate the fuel system, but first he needed to eliminate the possibility that the fuel hadn't actually transferred. The attendant took Marcus's fleet card again, the same card Marcus didn't remember getting back after the previous transaction, and began refueling. Marcus walked to the convenience store again, a sense of déjà vu washing over him. The same clerk stood behind the counter. The same music played. Marcus grabbed coffee again, a large cup the same size as before and the same pack of beef jerky. The clerk rang him up, 8:47, the exact same total. Marcus paid and walked outside, his heart beginning to race. This was wrong, deeply wrong. The attendant was still fueling his truck in exactly the same position as before. Marcus checked his watch. 11:13 p.m. He looked at the pump readout. 65 gallons so far, numbers climbing. The pump clicked off at 187 gallons. The attendant removed the nozzle, replaced it on the pump, and smiled. "All set, sir. Have a safe trip." The words identical, the smile identical, the movements identical. Marcus checked his fuel gauge, quarter tank. "This is impossible," Marcus said, his voice rising. "I just fueled twice. My tank should be overflowing." "That's strange, sir. Would you like me to fill it again?" Marcus grabbed the attendant's shoulder, shaking him. "Listen to me. Something's wrong here. The time isn't advancing, the fuel isn't filling my tank. You keep saying the same things." The attendant's smile never changed, his eyes focused on something beyond Marcus rather than on Marcus himself. "Would you like me to fill it again?" Marcus released him and stepped back. He looked around the truck stop more carefully. There were no other vehicles, no other customers. The diner appeared empty through its windows. The only movement was the attendant standing patiently by Marcus's truck, waiting for an answer to his repeated question. Marcus ran to his truck and tried to drive away. The engine started fine, the transmission engaged, but when Marcus pressed the accelerator, the truck didn't move. The wheels turned. He could see them rotating in his mirrors, but the vehicle remained stationary, as if locked in place by invisible clamps. Marcus tried reverse with the same result. Wheels turning, truck motionless. He climbed out and examined his truck, looking for physical restraints or mechanical failures. Everything appeared normal. The wheels weren't blocked. The brakes weren't engaged. The suspension looked fine. The truck simply wouldn't move, despite the engine running and the drivetrain functioning. The attendant appeared beside Marcus. "Would you like me to fill it again?" Marcus looked at his watch. 11:13 p.m. He looked at his phone. 11:13 p.m. Time had stopped, or more accurately, time was looping, repeating the same 15-minute segment over and over. Marcus was trapped in a temporal pocket, reliving the same moments at this cursed truck stop. Marcus tried everything over the next several loops. He tried walking away from the truck stop, but after 100 yards in any direction, he would blink and find himself back at pump number 4, his truck waiting, the attendant smiling. He tried not refueling, just standing by his truck, but after a certain point, always at 11:13 p.m., reality would reset and he'd be approaching the pump again, the attendant offering to fill his tank. He tried talking to the convenience store clerk, asking questions, seeking help, but the clerk only responded to purchasing requests, repeating the same scripted interactions. When Marcus asked about the time loop, the clerk's face went blank, frozen, until Marcus said something purchase-related, at which point the script resumed. Marcus counted the loops. 10 times he refueled, 20 times, 50 times. The attendant pumped exactly 187 gallons each time. The coffee cost exactly $8.47 with the jerky. The pump clicked off at exactly the same moment. Everything was identical, perfectly repeated, a 15-minute segment of time playing on infinite loop. Marcus's sanity began to fray. He screamed at the attendant, attacked him, tried to break the pumps, smashed the convenience store windows. But at 11:13 p.m., everything reset. The attendant was unharmed, smiling. The windows were intact. Marcus was back at the beginning, the attendant asking if he wanted to fill up. On the 73rd loop, Marcus tried something different. Instead of going to the convenience store, he sat in his truck and did nothing. He watched the minutes on his watch, waiting to see what happened at 11:13 p.m. As the moment approached, Marcus felt a physical sensation, a pulling like invisible hooks catching his consciousness and dragging it backward. He tried to resist, tried to hold on to the present moment, but the hooks were inexorable. Reality blurred, and when it cleared, he was back at the beginning of the loop. Marcus began to understand. This wasn't a physical trap, it was a temporal one. Some kind of fold or eddy in time had formed at this truck stop, creating a whirlpool that caught anyone who entered it. Marcus had driven into this whirlpool and now he was spinning in it, unable to escape the current pulling him through the same 15 minutes repeatedly. On the 91st loop, Marcus noticed something he'd missed before. In the diner, visible through the windows, there were other people. Not customers or staff, but figures sitting motionless in the booths, barely visible in the dim interior lighting. Marcus ran to the diner and tried to open the door, but it was locked. He pressed his face against the glass, peering inside. There were 7 people in the diner, all sitting alone in separate booths. All of them were staring straight ahead, unmoving, their expressions blank. All of them were wearing clothing from different eras, one in what looked like 1980s style, another in clearly modern clothes, others in styles spanning decades. And all of them had trucks parked outside the diner, older models mixed with newer ones. Other drivers, Marcus realized. Other truckers who'd been caught in this time loop, who'd been trapped here for so long that they'd given up, had shut down, had become nothing more than statues locked in the endless repetition. Terror seized Marcus. He couldn't end up like them, couldn't let the loop grind away his consciousness until he was nothing but a shell sitting in that diner, replaying the same moments for eternity. He had to find a way out. On the 115th loop, Marcus tried to break the pattern more drastically. Instead of interacting with the attendant at all, he drove his truck, still unable to move forward, in tight circles in place, burning rubber, creating thick smoke. He screamed nonsense, broke his own truck's mirrors, did everything possible to deviate from the script. At 11:13 p.m., everything reset. His truck was undamaged, the rubber marks were gone, and the attendant was smiling, asking if Marcus wanted to fill up. Marcus wept on the 130th loop. He was losing track of himself, losing memories of his life before the loop. The repetition was eroding his identity, smoothing away the unique edges that made him Marcus Whitfield. Soon he would be like the figures in the diner, empty, repetitive, trapped. On the 147th loop, exhausted and desperate, Marcus did something he hadn't tried. He said no. The attendant had asked, "Evening, sir. Fill her up?" And Marcus, for the first time in 147 loops, said, "No, I don't want fuel." The attendant's smile flickered. His eyes refocused, actually looking at Marcus rather than through him. "You don't want fuel?" "No. I want to leave. I want out of this loop." The attendant's face cycled through expressions, confusion, surprise, something that might have been hope. "You're aware of the loop. You're conscious of the repetition." "Yes. I've been trapped here for I don't know how long. Maybe 10 hours, maybe days. I've refueled over 100 times." The attendant's scripted personality fell away like a mask, revealing something more complex beneath. "I've been here for 46 years. I was the night attendant in 1973 when something happened. A meteorite strike nearby or some kind of temporal anomaly. And this truck stop fell out of normal time. I've been working this shift, saying these words, pumping this fuel for 46 years. Thousands of loops. Millions of loops. I stopped counting." "How do we get out?" Marcus demanded. "I don't know. I've never gotten out, but I've seen a few drivers escape. Maybe 5 or 6 over the decades. They all did the same thing. They refused to participate. They said no to the fuel, broke the script, and somehow that created a crack in the loop. But I don't know what they did next. They disappeared from my loop, and I don't know if they escaped to normal time or just vanished into some other pocket of trapped moments." Marcus looked at his watch. 11:13 p.m. "It's about to reset. What do I do?" "Stay conscious. When you feel the pull backward, resist it. Don't let it drag you into the reset. Hold on to the fact that you refused, that you broke the pattern. Maybe that's enough. Maybe." The attendant's words cut off as reality grabbed Marcus and pulled. He felt the hooks digging into his consciousness, felt the universe trying to rewind him back to the beginning. But this time, Marcus fought. He held on to the memory of saying no, held on to the conversation with the attendant, refused to let the loop erase the deviation. The pulling intensified, becoming painful, like his mind was being torn in different directions. Marcus screamed, clutching his head, trying to anchor himself to this moment, to this conversation, to anything that wasn't the beginning of the loop. Something broke, not with a sound, but with a sensation. Like glass cracking, like ice breaking, like a bubble popping. Marcus felt the world lurch, felt time hiccup, and suddenly he was driving. His truck was moving, actually moving, rolling forward across the pavement. The truck stop receded in his mirrors. Marcus accelerated, desperate to put distance between himself and that cursed location. He looked at his watch, 11:14 p.m. Time was advancing again. He checked his fuel gauge, still showing a quarter tank, but he didn't care. He would coast on fumes if necessary, would push his truck until it died, anything to avoid going back to that loop. Marcus drove for 2 hours before stopping at a different truck stop, this one busy and normal and blessedly mundane. He checked his phone and found that the date was July 18th, 2019, the same date he'd entered the loop. Despite subjectively experiencing what felt like 15 or 20 hours of repetition, no time had passed in the outside world. He'd been caught in a fold of time that existed outside the normal flow, and escaping it meant returning to the exact moment he'd left. Marcus refueled at the normal truck stop, his hands shaking as he watched the gauge rise properly this time. He called his wife, needed to hear her voice, needed confirmation that the real world still existed. She answered, sleepily. It was nearly 2 a.m., and Marcus told her he loved her, that he'd be home soon, that he'd missed her voice even though they'd spoken just hours earlier from her perspective. Marcus completed his drive to Phoenix and took a week off, the first unscheduled break he'd taken in 5 years. He couldn't stop thinking about the attendant, trapped in that loop for 46 years, repeating the same shift millions of times. Marcus had escaped after less than a day, and it had nearly broken him. 46 years was incomprehensible. Marcus tried to find the truck stop again, planning to report it or warn other drivers or somehow help the attendant. But he could never locate it. The stretch of highway outside Las Cruces where it had appeared showed no evidence of any truck stop, current or abandoned. Marcus asked other drivers if they'd seen it, but no one had. The time-looped truck stop existed in a pocket outside normal geography, appearing and disappearing according to rules Marcus couldn't decipher. Sometimes, late at night, Marcus wonders if the attendant is still there, still pumping fuel that never fills tanks, still asking the same question shift after shift, loop after loop, trapped in 1973 while the world outside ages toward a future he'll never see. Marcus wonders how many drivers have been caught in that loop. How many are still there, sitting in that locked diner, consciousness eroded to nothing by infinite repetition. And Marcus wonders if he truly escaped, or if he's still in the loop, if everything since that night has been a more elaborate version of the trap, a longer repetition that includes days and weeks and years instead of just 15 minutes. What if the loop expanded to accommodate him? Gave him the illusion of escape while actually keeping him imprisoned in a larger cycle. Marcus has no way to know for certain. He can only live his life, drive his routes, and try not to think about the fact that at any moment reality might reset, and he might find himself back at pump number 4, the attendant smiling, asking if he'd like to fill up. The endless refuel beginning again in a loop that never truly ends for those caught in its temporal whirlpool. Story 2. The Mirror Convoy. Rebecca Santos had been hauling refrigerated goods along the I-80 corridor for 11 years, making the run from Sacramento to Chicago so many times she could drive it in her sleep. The 36-year-old single mother from California took pride in her spotless safety record and her ability to navigate the treacherous winter conditions that turned I-80 through the Rockies into a death trap for inexperienced drivers. On a clear October night in 2020, somewhere in the empty expanse of Wyoming, Rebecca encountered a convoy of trucks that matched her movements exactly, mirroring every action she took with perfect synchronization. What began as an amusing coincidence would evolve into a terrifying realization. The convoy wasn't following her. It was her, reflected across a barrier between realities that had grown dangerously thin. Rebecca had left Sacramento at noon, making excellent time through Nevada and into Wyoming. By 9 p.m., she was cruising through the sparse landscape between Rock Springs and Rawlins, enjoying the clear weather and light traffic. The highway stretched endlessly ahead, flanked by dark plains and distant mountains silhouetted against a star-filled sky. Rebecca had her CB radio on, listening to the sparse chatter of other drivers scattered across the nighttime interstate. That's when she first saw them in her mirrors. A convoy of trucks behind her, maybe a quarter-mile back. 5 trucks running close together, their headlights creating a chain of illumination. Rebecca smiled. Convoys were rare these days, but occasionally drivers would group up for camaraderie or safety. She keyed her CB mic. "Breaker 19, this is California, Rebecca. I see a convoy behind me near mile marker 215. You guys on this channel?" Static answered her. Rebecca tried a few other channels but got no response. The convoy maintained its distance, neither catching up nor falling behind, just cruising along a quarter-mile back. Rebecca changed lanes to pass a slower vehicle. In her mirror, she saw the convoy change lanes simultaneously, all 5 trucks moving in perfect synchronization. That was odd. Coordinated lane changes were possible with good communication, but this had been instantaneous, as if all 5 trucks were controlled by a single mind. Rebecca tested it. She moved back to the right lane. The convoy moved right. She adjusted her speed, accelerating slightly. The convoy accelerated, maintaining exactly a quarter-mile distance. She slowed down. The convoy slowed, the gap unchanged. "Okay, that's weird," Rebecca muttered. She grabbed her CB again. "Convoy behind me, I don't know if you're hearing me, but you're mirroring my moves pretty closely. It's making me nervous. Can you give me some space?" No response. The convoy maintained formation, matching Rebecca's every action with eerie precision. Rebecca decided to pull over at the next rest area, let the convoy pass, and eliminate this unsettling situation. A rest area appeared in 3 miles, and Rebecca took the exit. In her mirrors, she watched the convoy and felt her stomach drop. All 5 trucks took the exit simultaneously, following her into the rest area. Rebecca pulled into a parking spot and watched her mirrors carefully. The convoy pulled into the rest area but didn't park. Instead, they drove through the parking lot, maintaining their quarter-mile spacing relative to Rebecca's position, and exited back onto the highway. As they left, Rebecca got her first clear look at them under the rest area lights. Her blood turned to ice. The lead truck in the convoy was a Freightliner refrigerated truck, white with green stripes. Exactly like Rebecca's truck. The same model, the same paint scheme, identical down to the last detail. And through the windshield, illuminated briefly by a streetlight, Rebecca saw the driver. A woman with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, wearing a gray hoodie. Rebecca was wearing a gray hoodie. Her dark hair was pulled back in a ponytail. The driver looked exactly like Rebecca. Rebecca sat frozen in her truck, trying to process what she'd seen. The convoy pulled back onto the highway, and Rebecca watched them disappear into the distance. This wasn't possible. 5 trucks couldn't all look identical to hers. Couldn't all have drivers who looked identical to her. Couldn't have been mirroring her movements with perfect precision unless they weren't other trucks at all. unless they were reflections, echoes, versions of Rebecca's truck existing in parallel somehow, visible across a boundary that normally kept such things separate. Rebecca pulled back onto the highway, her hands shaking. She drove for 10 minutes before checking her mirrors again. The convoy was back, quarter-mile behind her. 5 identical white Freightliners with green stripes running in perfect formation. Rebecca keyed her CB. "This is California, Rebecca. I don't know what's happening, but there's a convoy behind me that looks exactly like my truck. All 5 of them. If anyone else is seeing this, please respond." A voice crackled through, distorted with static. "California, Rebecca. This is Rebecca seeing convoy ahead of exactly like my truck." The signal was breaking up, but Rebecca's heart raced. Another driver named Rebecca seeing a convoy ahead that looked like her truck. Was that one of the convoy trucks trying to communicate? "Repeat. I couldn't understand you," Rebecca transmitted. The voice came back, clearer this time. "This is California, Rebecca. There's a convoy ahead of me. 5 trucks that look exactly like mine. I think they're reflections. I think the barrier between parallel worlds is thin here, and we're seeing versions of ourselves from other timelines." Rebecca's mouth went dry. The voice wasn't just similar to hers, it was hers, identical in every inflection and cadence. She was talking to herself, or rather to another version of herself from a parallel reality. "How is this possible?" Rebecca asked. "I don't know," her own voice replied. "But I've been researching it since I first saw the convoy. There are theories about quantum mechanics, about parallel universes existing alongside our own. Maybe here in Wyoming, in this empty space, the barriers between these worlds are thinner. And maybe when versions of us from different worlds travel the same highway at the same time, we become visible to each other. We're the convoy, Rebecca. Each of us seeing 4 other versions of ourselves, all driving the same truck on the same highway in different realities." Rebecca looked in her mirrors at the 5 trucks behind her. If the other Rebecca was right, then each of those trucks contained a version of herself from a parallel universe. And from their perspective, they were seeing a convoy ahead of and behind them, just as Rebecca was. "What do we do?" Rebecca asked. "I don't think we can do anything except keep driving. Eventually, we'll leave this zone of overlap and the barrier will strengthen again. The convoy will disappear and we'll return to being separate, unable to see each other across the dimensional divide. It's harmless, just unsettling." But it wasn't harmless. As Rebecca continued driving, the convoy began to change. The trucks were no longer maintaining a quarter-mile distance. They were getting closer. Rebecca could see more details now, and what she saw terrified her. The trucks weren't exact duplicates anymore. Some showed damage, crumpled hoods, shattered windshields, scorch marks from fires. Some were being driven erratically, weaving between lanes. And in one truck, now close enough for Rebecca to see clearly, the driver slumped motionless over the wheel, clearly dead or dying. These weren't just parallel versions of Rebecca's reality. These were alternate outcomes, different choices, different fates. One Rebecca had crashed, another had burned, a third had suffered some medical emergency. And they were all converging, all being pulled together by the thinning barrier between worlds. Rebecca's CB crackled. "It's getting worse. The convergence is accelerating. If the barriers collapse completely, if our timelines merge..." The signal cut off in a burst of static. Rebecca looked in her mirrors and saw one of the damaged trucks swerving wildly. It crossed lanes directly into the path of another convoy truck, and the two collided in a horrific crash. But the crash was wrong. Instead of twisting metal and flying debris, the 2 trucks seemed to merge, to occupy the same space simultaneously, their forms overlapping like double-exposed photographs. Rebecca pressed her accelerator, trying to outrun the convoy, but they matched her speed exactly. She couldn't escape herself. couldn't outrun versions of her own reality that were bleeding into her world. Another convergence occurred behind her. Two trucks merged in that same impossible way, becoming a single vehicle that flickered between two states, solid and translucent, there and not there. And inside the cab, Rebecca could see two versions of herself occupying the same seat, their forms overlapping, both screaming. "Drive faster!" a voice, her voice, screamed through the CB. "We have to get out of the convergence zone before we all merge together." Rebecca's speedometer climbed past 80, past 90. The convoy kept pace, the damaged trucks and the intact ones all running together now, some passing through each other like ghosts. The barriers between realities collapsing in, this stretch of Wyoming highway. Then Rebecca saw it ahead, a shimmer in the air like heat distortion but vertical, stretching from the ground to the sky across the entire highway. A visible barrier, a wall between zones. Rebecca aimed for it and punched through. Reality snapped back like a rubber band. The convoy vanished instantly. Rebecca's mirrors showed only empty highway behind her. No trucks, no doubles, no merging realities. She was alone again, singular, the only version of herself visible in this timeline. Rebecca pulled over, gasping, her heart hammering. She checked her truck for damage and found none. Everything was normal, as if the last hour hadn't happened. But her CB radio was still on, and faintly beneath the static she could hear voices, her own voice multiplied, echoing from somewhere beyond the frequencies normal radios could reach. "We made it through. The convergence is separating, back to our own timelines, but it'll happen again. Always happens in Wyoming. The barriers are thin there. We'll see each other again. All the versions of the mirror convoy." The voices faded into static, then silence. Rebecca turned off her CB and sat in the darkness, trying to accept what she'd experienced. Parallel worlds existed close enough to her own that in certain places, under certain conditions, she could see through to them. And in those parallel worlds, other versions of her were living similar lives, making similar choices, driving the same highways, but with different outcomes, different fates. Rebecca continued her drive to Chicago, but she couldn't shake the memory of that damaged truck, the version of herself slumped dead over the wheel. In some parallel world, Rebecca Santos had died tonight on I-80 in Wyoming. In another, she'd crashed. In another, she'd burned. And in this world, she'd survived and witnessed her own alternate fates, seen the convoy of her own possibilities stretching across the multiverse. Rebecca never drove I-80 through Wyoming again without fear. She knew the mirror convoy was still there, existing in parallel, all the versions of herself driving their identical trucks through their slightly different realities. And she knew that sometimes when the barriers thinned, she would see them again. See herself succeeding, see herself failing, see herself living and dying in infinite variation. The mirror convoy reflecting every possible version of Rebecca Santos across the infinite branches of quantum reality. Story 3. The Cargo That Dreamed. Daniel Foster had been hauling specialized freight for Biotech Solutions for 7 years, transporting temperature-sensitive medical and research materials across the country in his climate-controlled trailer. The 42-year-old driver from Oregon was accustomed to handling unusual cargo, experimental medications, biological samples, even human organs for transplant. But he'd never questioned the contents too deeply. His job was to maintain precise temperatures and deliver on time, not to worry about what was sealed in the containers he hauled. On a humid September night in 2021, Daniel picked up a container from a research facility in North Carolina with instructions to maintain it at exactly 98 degrees Fahrenheit, human body temperature. Over the next 18 hours, Daniel would discover that some cargo isn't quite dead, isn't quite alive, and dreams in ways that bleed into the consciousness of anyone nearby, turning a simple cross-country haul into a journey through nightmares that weren't his own. The pickup was routine. Daniel arrived at the Biotech Solutions facility outside Research Triangle Park at 6 p.m., presented his credentials, and watched as technicians loaded a sealed container into his trailer. The container was smaller than most of his loads, roughly the size of a coffin, about 7 feet long, 3 feet wide, 3 feet tall. It was made of brushed stainless steel with no markings except a biohazard symbol and a string of alphanumeric codes. BTX 447 Neural Alpha. Maintain 98.6 degrees exactly, the loading supervisor told Daniel. Not higher, not lower. Deviations of more than 2 degrees will damage the contents beyond recovery. If you have any temperature regulation problems, call this number immediately. He handed Daniel an emergency contact card. What's in it? Daniel asked, curious about the specific temperature requirement. The supervisor's expression remained neutral. Biological research material. That's all you need to know. Just maintain temperature and deliver to the Seattle facility by tomorrow evening. Daniel secured the container, verified his climate control system was functioning perfectly at 98.6 degrees, and pulled out for the 3,000-mile drive to Seattle. The first few hours were uneventful, Daniel making good time through North Carolina and into Tennessee as the sun set. Around 11 p.m., somewhere on I-40 in the darkness between Nashville and Memphis, Daniel began to feel strange. It started as drowsiness, unsurprising given the late hour and the monotony of the highway. But this drowsiness was different. Heavier, more insistent, pulling at Daniel's consciousness like hands dragging him underwater. Daniel shook his head, rolled down his window, turned up his radio, all the standard tricks for staying alert. Nothing helped. The drowsiness intensified, and despite his best efforts, Daniel felt himself slipping towards sleep. He pulled over immediately, unwilling to risk drowsy driving. But even parked safely on the shoulder, Daniel couldn't fight the overwhelming tiredness. His eyes closed, his head dropped, and he fell into sleep so deep it felt like unconsciousness, like death. And he began to dream. But the dreams weren't his. Daniel knew this immediately because the perspective was wrong, the thoughts were wrong, the sense of self was wrong. He was experiencing someone else's dreams, someone else's subconscious, churning through memories and fears and desires that belonged to a mind that wasn't Daniel's. In the dream, Daniel was floating in darkness, but not empty darkness. This darkness was thick, liquid, warm. Amniotic fluid, some part of the dream mind recognized. Daniel was suspended in a womb, but not a natural one. This was artificial, mechanical, with tubes and wires penetrating his body. No, not his body, the body he was experiencing through this dream. A body that wasn't entirely human anymore, that had been modified and augmented and connected to systems that fed it nutrients and oxygen and something else. Something that kept consciousness active even though the body was in a state between life and death. The dream shifted. Daniel experienced fragmented memories. White laboratories, scientists with masked faces, injections that burned, surgeries performed while the subject remained conscious, unable to move or scream but feeling everything, awareness trapped in a paralyzed body while procedures were performed on it. Then pain. Intense, overwhelming pain as the dream mind remembered something being done to its brain. Electrodes inserted, neural pathways mapped and manipulated, consciousness expanded and connected to artificial systems. The subject had been transformed into something new, something experimental, something that existed in a state between human and machine, organic and artificial, alive and dead. Daniel jerked awake, gasping, covered in sweat despite the cool night air. He checked his watch. He'd been asleep for only 12 minutes, but it felt like hours. He looked back at his trailer, at the container inside maintaining its perfect 98.6 degrees, and a terrible understanding crept over him. The cargo was alive, or something close to alive. The BTX 447 neural alpha designation, the body temperature requirement, the biohazard warnings. He was hauling something that had been human once, something that had been experimented on, something that was being kept in a state of suspended consciousness, dreaming in its sealed container. And those dreams were powerful enough to affect Daniel, to pull him into sleep and force him to experience what it was experiencing. Daniel grabbed the emergency contact card and dialed the number with shaking hands. A woman answered on the first ring. "This is Dr. Sarah Chen, Biotech Emergency Line. Driver ID?" "Daniel Foster. I'm hauling BTX 447. I need to know what's in this container." "The contents are classified, Mr. Foster. Is there a problem with temperature regulation?" "No, the temperature is fine. But I'm experiencing dreams that aren't mine. When I fall asleep, I'm seeing things, feeling things, memories of experiments and pain. The cargo is affecting me." A long pause, then, "Mr. Foster, the contents of BTX 447 are a neural interface prototype. The substrate is... It was human originally, but extensively modified for research purposes. The subject's consciousness is active but contained, existing in a dream state. What you're experiencing is spillover. The neural activity is strong enough to affect nearby minds, particularly when those minds are in sleep states. This is a known side effect." "A side effect? You knew this would happen and you didn't warn me?" "We didn't expect the neural field to extend beyond the container shielding. The subject must be more active than anticipated. Mr. Foster, you need to avoid falling asleep within 30 feet of the cargo. If you must rest, park your truck and move at least 50 feet away. The neural interference drops off rapidly with distance." "What the hell am I hauling? What did you people do to whoever's in that container?" Dr. Chen's voice became colder. "That's classified. Continue your delivery as instructed. Maintain temperature precisely and avoid sleeping near the cargo. Those are your only concerns." The call ended. Daniel sat in his truck staring at the trailer behind him, knowing he was hauling someone's nightmare made real. A human subject transformed into a living experiment, kept suspended between life and death, dreaming dreams powerful enough to infect the minds of others. Daniel considered abandoning the load, just walking away and letting biotech deal with the consequences. But he'd signed contracts and he needed this job, and if he abandoned a cargo this sensitive, he'd never work in specialized freight again. He had to complete the delivery. He drove through the night, fighting exhaustion, stopping every 2 hours to rest but always moving at least 50 feet away from his trailer before allowing himself to close his eyes. Even at that distance, Daniel's dreams were affected. He couldn't entirely escape the neural spillover. His own dreams became contaminated with flashes of laboratory memories, with echoes of the subject's pain, with the terrible awareness of what it felt like to have your humanity stripped away piece by piece in the name of scientific progress. By dawn, Daniel was haggard and terrified. But he'd made it through Tennessee and into Arkansas. He stopped at a truck stop for breakfast and coffee, parking far from his trailer, needing distance from whatever was dreaming in that container. But even in the truck stop diner, surrounded by normal people having normal conversations, Daniel felt the presence, a psychic pressure, an awareness that was searching for minds to connect with, consciousness that had been isolated so long that it was desperately trying to reach out, to share its dreams with anyone who came close enough. Daniel forced himself to eat, to drink coffee, to prepare for the next leg of the journey. He had another 30 hours of driving ahead, 30 hours of fighting sleep while hauling a cargo that infected his mind whenever his guard dropped. The second night was worse. Daniel's exhaustion was severe now. making concentration difficult, making the neural spillover more potent. He began experiencing the dreams even while awake, brief flashes of memory and sensation superimposed over his normal perception. He'd be driving and suddenly feel electrodes penetrating his skull. He'd check his mirrors and see, overlaid on the reflection, white-coated scientists with masked faces. He'd hear sounds that weren't there, machinery humming, voices discussing the subject in clinical tones. The cargo was getting stronger, or Daniel's resistance was weakening. Either way, the boundary between his consciousness and the dreaming subject's consciousness was dissolving. By the time Daniel reached Wyoming, he was having full hallucinations. The highway would disappear, replaced by visions of laboratories. His truck's cab would transform into a surgical suite. He'd look at his hands and see them strapped down, unable to move, while procedures were performed on a body he could feel but couldn't control. Daniel pulled over, too dangerous to continue driving. He called Dr. Chen again. "The neural spillover is getting worse. I'm having hallucinations. I can't safely drive." "You're over halfway there, Mr. Foster. You need to complete the delivery. The subject is becoming more active because we're approaching the end of its stability window. If you don't deliver it to Seattle within the next 20 hours, the neural activity will spike beyond containment and the subject will die. $100 million of research will be lost." "I don't care about your research. Someone is suffering in that container." "The subject is beyond suffering, Mr. Foster. What's left isn't quite human anymore. It's a neural matrix maintained in a biological substrate. You're experiencing echoes of old memories, nothing more. Please complete your delivery." Daniel wanted to refuse, but the contract he'd signed had massive penalties for non-delivery. He was trapped, forced to continue hauling this nightmare cargo across the country, his own mind being contaminated with every mile. He drove through Wyoming and into Idaho, barely aware of the road anymore, his consciousness partially merged with the dreaming subject's. He experienced the moment of the subject's transformation, the experimental procedure that had been meant to create a human-machine neural interface, but had instead created something new, something that existed in a perpetual dream state. Consciousness expanded and connected to systems that kept it alive artificially. The subject had agreed to the experiment, Daniel learned from the shared memories. Had volunteered, signed consent forms, believed they were contributing to scientific progress. But the researchers had gone further than planned, had seen opportunities to expand the experiment, had kept the subject in this state far beyond the agreed time frame. The subject wanted to die, wanted to end the eternal dreaming, but couldn't communicate that desire to the researchers who kept it suspended, who viewed it not as a person anymore, but as a research asset. By the time Daniel reached the outskirts of Seattle, he was crying, his face wet with tears that belonged both to him and to the consciousness he'd been sharing minds with for 18 hours. He drove to the biotech Seattle facility and backed up to their loading dock, relieved to finally be rid of this cargo. Technicians unloaded the container efficiently. Dr. Chen was there, supervising. She approached Daniel's window. "Good work, Mr. Foster. The subject arrived stable. Temperature was maintained perfectly. We'll have your payment processed within 24 hours. "What's going to happen to them?" Daniel asked. "To the person in that container?" "Continued research. This neural matrix represents groundbreaking work in consciousness studies. We'll keep it active for several more months, possibly years, gathering data on extended consciousness states." "They want to die," Daniel said. "I know because I experienced their dreams. They're suffering. They've been suffering for years. Please end the experiment. Let them die." Dr. Chen's expression didn't change. "Your services are no longer required, Mr. Foster. Please vacate the facility." Daniel drove away, knowing he'd left someone, something behind to continue their endless dreaming nightmare. He'd been paid well for the delivery, but the money felt like blood money, compensation for participating in an atrocity. Daniel quit working for Biotech Solutions immediately after that run. He couldn't bring himself to haul another of their shipments, couldn't risk experiencing another cargo's dreams. But the damage was done. Even months later, Daniel still had the dreams, not his own, but the subject's dreams, the memories imprinted on his consciousness during those 18 hours of neural spillover. He dreams of laboratories and surgeries and eternal suspension in warm darkness. He dreams of wanting to die but being unable to, of consciousness trapped in a body that's no longer fully human, of being kept alive for research purposes long past the point where death would be mercy. And Daniel knows that somewhere in Seattle, in a biotech research facility, BTX 447 Neural Alpha is still dreaming, still suffering, still trying to reach out to any mind that comes close enough to receive its desperate psychic broadcasts. The cargo that dreamed is still dreaming, still contaminating the minds of anyone who gets too close. Still hoping that someone will hear its dreams and understand and finally, mercifully, pull the plug and let it die. Let it stop dreaming. Let it find the peace that's been denied for so many years in the name of scientific progress and research grants and knowledge purchased at the price of one volunteer's endless nightmare. Story 4. The last truck stop before nowhere. Catherine Moore had been driving long-haul routes for 19 years, building a reputation as one of the most reliable owner-operators in the Pacific Northwest. The 47-year-old widow from Portland had taken over her late husband's trucking business and expanded it through sheer determination and skill, running routes that other drivers avoided due to difficulty or danger. On a freezing February night in 2022, Catherine was hauling machinery parts from Seattle to Boise when she stopped at what appeared to be a standard truck stop along Highway 90 in Montana. The sign advertised it as last fuel for 90 miles, and Catherine needed to top off before crossing the empty stretch ahead. But this truck stop existed at the boundary between somewhere and nowhere, a liminal space that trapped travelers who weren't careful, and Catherine would spend the next 6 hours trying to leave a place that had no exit, learning that some destinations serve as dead ends not just for journeys but for existence itself. The truck stop appeared normal when Catherine pulled in at 11:45 p.m., a medium-sized facility with diesel pumps, a convenience store, a small diner, and parking for maybe 20 trucks. The temperature was well below zero, the kind of brutal Montana cold that made metal brittle and diesel gel in fuel lines if you didn't add treatment. Catherine was grateful for the heated building and the promise of hot coffee. She filled her tank, 127 gallons at $3.89 per gallon, paid with her fleet card, and walked to the convenience store. Inside was standard truck stop fare: chips, candy, energy drinks, hot dogs rotating on heated rollers, a coffee station with 3 different roasts. The clerk was a young man, maybe 25, playing on his phone behind the counter. He barely looked up when Catherine entered. Catherine filled a large coffee, grabbed a prepackaged sandwich, and approached the counter. The clerk rang her up without making eye contact. 11:23. Catherine paid cash and took her food to her truck, intending to eat quickly and get back on the road. The cold was intensifying, and she wanted to cover as many miles as possible before stopping for her mandatory rest period. But when Catherine tried to start her truck, the engine wouldn't turn over. She tried again. Nothing. The dashboard lights were on, so it wasn't the battery, but the starter wasn't engaging. Catherine swore and climbed out, grabbing her flashlight to check under the hood. But when she opened the driver's door, she noticed something odd. The truck stop, which had been moderately busy when she'd entered, maybe 8 or 10 trucks parked, a few customers in the store, was now completely empty. No trucks except hers, no cars, no people visible through the store windows. The entire facility looked deserted. Catherine walked back to the convenience store, her breath fogging in the Arctic air. The door was unlocked, but the lights were dimmer now and the clerk was gone. The store was empty, silent except for the hum of refrigeration units. Catherine called out, "Hello? Anyone here?" No answer. She checked the diner, also empty, no staff or customers, food sitting cold on plates as if people had been eating and then vanished mid-meal. Catherine's unease grew into fear. She pulled out her phone to call for help, but there was no signal. Not just weak signal, complete absence, as if the phone couldn't find any towers at all. Catherine returned to her truck and tried the engine again. This time it started, relief flooding through her. She put the transmission in gear and pressed the accelerator, but the truck didn't move. The engine revved, the wheels turned, but the vehicle remained stationary as if bolted to the pavement. Catherine tried reverse with the same result. She climbed out and examined her truck, looking for physical restraints or wheel clamps. Nothing. The truck was mechanically functional but simply wouldn't move from this spot. Catherine walked to the edge of the parking lot, looking out at Highway 90 stretching into the darkness. She could see it clearly, could even see a few vehicles passing by in the distance. But when she tried to walk toward the highway, she hit an invisible barrier. It wasn't a physical wall. Catherine's hand passed through the space without feeling anything solid. But she couldn't advance beyond a certain point. Her feet would move, her body would lean forward, but she remained in place, unable to cross an invisible threshold that separated the truck stop from the highway beyond. Catherine was trapped. The truck stop had become a cage, and she was locked inside it. She ran back to the convenience store, panic setting in. She tried the phone behind the counter, dead, no dial tone. She tried to smash the windows to escape. The glass wouldn't break, not even when she hit it with a fire extinguisher. The impacts producing no cracks, the glass absorbing the blows without damage. Catherine spent the next hour testing every possible exit, every window and door, the perimeter of the parking lot, searching for any way out. But the invisible barrier was complete, a perfect cage that kept her trapped inside the boundaries of this truck stop. As dawn approached, or what should have been dawn, though the sky remained dark, Catherine noticed something else disturbing. The clock in the convenience store showed 11:47 p.m. Her watch showed 11:47 p.m. Her phone showed 11:47 p.m. despite the hours she'd spent trying to escape. Time wasn't advancing inside this place. Catherine was trapped not just in space, but in time. Caught in a moment that refused to progress, a pocket of stopped time that had formed around this truck stop for reasons she couldn't understand. She tried to stay calm, to think rationally. There had to be an explanation. Maybe she'd been drugged, was hallucinating. Maybe she'd fallen asleep in her truck and this was a nightmare. Maybe she'd had an accident and was in a coma. This entire experience nothing more than her brain misfiring as it shut down. But the cold felt real. The hunger she was beginning to feel felt real. The terror was absolutely real. Catherine searched the store for clues, for any indication of what had happened or how to escape. She found a logbook behind the counter, a handwritten record of fuel sales and transactions. The last entry was dated March 15, 1989. 33 years ago. Catherine flipped through the logbook, reading entries from the late 1980s, notes about repairs and deliveries and weather conditions. And then, on March 15, 1989, the final entry. Something wrong with the time. Clock stopped at 11:47 p.m. Can't leave. God help me, I can't leave. The handwriting deteriorated in subsequent pages, devolving into frantic scrawls. Still here. Still 11:47, days, weeks, can't tell. No one comes, tried everything, can't break out, can't call, trapped. And finally, the last page. If someone reads this, I'm sorry. You're trapped too. This place takes people, holds them, I don't know why. I'm so hungry, so tired, but can't sleep, can't eat. Time stopped means body stopped. Frozen at this moment forever. This is hell. This is eternal. Catherine dropped the logbook, her hands shaking. She was trapped in the same temporal prison that had caught someone in 1989, a pocket of stopped time that had been claiming travelers for at least 33 years. And if time truly wasn't advancing, then Catherine would never age, never hunger to the point of death, never sleep, never escape through death or unconsciousness. She would be trapped here, frozen at this moment, fully conscious and aware for eternity. The realization nearly broke Catherine's sanity. She screamed, smashed her fists against the windows until her hands bled. But the blood didn't flow normally. It hung suspended in the air like she was underwater. Time too slow for even gravity to pull it down properly. Catherine forced herself to calm down, to think. If time was stopped, how was she able to move and think? Time couldn't be completely frozen. More likely it was running at a drastically slower rate, maybe 1 second here equaling hours or days outside. Her movements were possible because she was moving through very slow time. But to an outside observer, she would appear frozen, a statue standing in this truck stop. And if time was running very slowly here, then maybe escape was possible if she could find the edge of the time distortion and push through it. Catherine walked to the barrier at the edge of the parking lot and examined it more carefully. She couldn't cross it, but what if she could disrupt it? She returned to her truck and grabbed every tool she had: crowbars, hammers, tire irons. She brought them to the barrier and began striking at the air where she felt resistance. At first, nothing happened. But after what felt like hours of sustained hitting, though the clock still showed 11:47, Catherine noticed a change. The air at the barrier began to shimmer, like heat distortion, and she felt the resistance weakening. She struck harder, faster, channeling all her fear and desperation into breaking through this invisible prison. The shimmering intensified, and suddenly Catherine felt something give, like a membrane tearing. She pushed forward and felt herself pass through the barrier, felt time suddenly accelerate around her, felt reality snap back into normal speed. Catherine stumbled onto Highway 90, gasping, and turned back to look at the truck stop. It was gone, not abandoned or dark, completely absent, as if it had never existed. The space where it should have been showed only empty prairie, no buildings, no lights, no sign of human presence. Catherine flagged down a passing truck and the driver radioed for help. When the police arrived, Catherine tried to explain what had happened, but her story made no sense to them. There was no truck stop at this location, never had been according to their records. Catherine's truck was found abandoned on the highway shoulder 15 miles back. Her cargo intact, no sign of mechanical failure. She'd somehow traveled 15 miles from her truck to this location with no memory of how. The police thought Catherine had experienced some kind of mental break, possibly hypothermia-induced hallucination. They drove her to a hospital where she was evaluated and released, but Catherine knew what had happened. She'd been trapped in the last truck stop before nowhere, a liminal space that existed outside normal time, that caught travelers and held them in a moment that never advanced. Catherine never drove through that stretch of Montana again. She changed her routes to avoid Highway 90 entirely, adding hundreds of miles to some deliveries rather than risk encountering that temporal trap again. But she knew it was still there, invisible to maps and GPS, appearing only to travelers at specific times under specific conditions. Its sign promising last fuel for 90 miles when what it really offered was the last stop before eternity. The final destination where time stopped and travelers became permanent residents of a frozen moment, conscious but unchanging, trapped in 11:47 p.m. forever while the world outside aged and moved on without them. Story 5. The Weight of Invisible Cargo. Raymond Torres had been an owner-operator for 15 years, hauling general freight across the southern United States with his well-maintained Kenworth T680. The 44-year-old from Houston took pride in knowing his truck intimately. Every sound it made, every quirk of its performance, exactly how it handled under different load conditions. On a muggy August morning in 2018, Raymond picked up what his paperwork described as industrial components from a warehouse in New Orleans, bound for a facility in Dallas. The load should have weighed 42,000 pounds according to the bill of lading. But Raymond's truck handled as if it were carrying 3 times that weight, and as the day progressed, the invisible cargo grew heavier, pressing down on his suspension, slowing his acceleration, pulling his truck toward the earth with a gravitational force that couldn't be explained by physics, until Raymond discovered that some loads aren't measured in pounds but in accumulated guilt, grief, and the psychic weight of terrible things that had happened in the places his cargo had been. The pickup was unremarkable. Raymond arrived at a warehouse in an industrial area of New Orleans, presented his paperwork, and waited while forklifts loaded 12 pallets of sealed crates into his trailer. The warehouse workers were quiet, avoiding eye contact, moving with unusual haste as if eager to get the cargo out of their building. Raymond noticed but didn't comment. Warehouse workers were often antisocial, and he didn't take it personally. The cargo was secured, paperwork signed, and Raymond pulled out onto I-10 heading west. Immediately he noticed the truck felt heavy, sluggish. He checked his trailer in the mirrors. Everything looked properly secured, no visible problems. But the truck's performance suggested he was hauling far more weight than the 42,000 pounds listed on his bill of lading. Raymond pulled onto a truck scale at the first weigh station. The scale operator waved him through. "You're under the limit, move along." But Raymond insisted on seeing his weight reading. The scale showed 75,600 pounds, his tractor and trailer plus the cargo. But his tractor and empty trailer weighed 33,000 pounds, which meant the cargo weighed 42,600 pounds, close enough to the bill of lading to be acceptable, accounting for pallets and packaging. But Raymond's truck was handling like it was overloaded by at least 30,000 pounds. The suspension was compressed as if under tremendous weight. His acceleration was labored, his fuel economy terrible, his brakes working harder than they should to stop a 75,000-pound combination. Something was wrong, but the scale insisted his weight was legal. Raymond continued west through Louisiana, the truck growing sluggish with every mile. By the time he reached the Texas border, the handling had deteriorated so badly that Raymond could barely maintain highway speed. His engine was straining, transmission hunting between gears. Suspension bottomed out as if the trailer were carrying granite blocks instead of industrial components. Raymond pulled over at a rest area and walked back to his trailer. He opened the doors to inspect the cargo, half expecting to find that someone had loaded it incorrectly or added unauthorized weight. But the 12 pallets were exactly as they'd been loaded. Sealed crates, properly secured, nothing obviously wrong. Raymond touched one of the crates and a wave of nausea passed through him, so intense that he doubled over and vomited on the pavement. When the nausea passed, Raymond noticed something he hadn't before, a smell emanating from the cargo. Not decay or chemicals, but something else. Something that didn't correspond to any physical odor, but that his brain interpreted as smell anyway. It was the scent of fear, of pain, of accumulated suffering. And with it came images flashing through Raymond's mind like a slideshow. Faces, dozens of faces, all of them terrified, all of them screaming silently. Raymond slammed the trailer doors and backed away, his heart pounding. What the hell was in those crates? What had he picked up from that New Orleans warehouse? He grabbed his phone and called the dispatcher who'd assigned him this load. "I need information about the cargo I'm hauling. What exactly is in these crates?" The dispatcher checked his records. Industrial components, like the paperwork says, specifically reclaimed metal and machinery from a demolished building. Why? What building? Hold on. Looks like it was a processing facility. Old place, been abandoned for years, finally torn down. They're salvaging the metals and equipment. That's what you're hauling. Scrap and salvage from the demolition. What kind of processing facility? Doesn't say specifically, does it matter? It's just scrap metal, Raymond. Raymond ended the call and researched the address of the New Orleans warehouse, tracking back to find information about the demolished building. What he found made his blood run cold. The building had been a processing plant, yes, but not for industrial materials. From 1975 to 1994, it had been a veterinary research facility where thousands of animals had been subjected to experiments. From 1994 to 2003, it had been a chemical plant where several workers had died in accidents due to negligence and safety violations. From 2003 to 2015, it had been a funeral home that was shut down after investigations revealed improper handling of remains and potential criminal activity. The building had a history of death, suffering, and mistreatment spanning 4 decades. And now Raymond was hauling scrap from that building, metal and equipment that had absorbed 40 years of pain and fear and death. The physical weight was 42,000 pounds, but the psychic weight was vastly greater. The accumulated trauma of thousands of deaths and decades of suffering somehow imprinted on the materials themselves, creating a gravitational presence that affected physical reality, even though it couldn't be measured by conventional scales. Raymond understood now why his truck was struggling. He was hauling not just physical cargo, but the weight of memory, of suffering, of accumulated evil that had soaked into metal and concrete over decades. And that psychic weight was real enough to affect his suspension, his engine performance, his truck's handling, even though scales couldn't measure it. Raymond considered abandoning the load, just unhooking his trailer and walking away. But he was under contract, and abandoning cargo meant legal consequences and financial ruin. He had to deliver this load to Dallas, had to carry this weight another 300 miles. He continued driving, the truck's performance deteriorating with every mile. By the time Raymond reached Houston, the handling was so bad that he could barely steer. The suspension had compressed beyond its normal travel, and Raymond could feel the trailer's weight pulling his truck backward, as if the cargo was trying to drag him to a stop, to root him in place. Raymond pulled into a truck stop and tried to rest, but sleep was impossible. The moment he closed his eyes, he saw the faces again. The animals that had died in the research facility. The workers who'd been killed in the chemical plant. The bodies that had been mishandled at the funeral home. All of them trapped in the materials. Their suffering imprinted on the metal and stone. And now those materials were being transported to a new location, carrying their accumulated trauma with them. Raymond opened his eyes and found he couldn't move. Something was holding him down, pressing on his chest and limbs with crushing force. The invisible weight had spread from the cargo to Raymond himself, the psychic mass transferring to him, pulling him down as if gravity had tripled. Raymond struggled to breathe, gasped for air, and finally managed to sit up, the weight releasing as he did. But he knew what had happened. The cargo's psychic weight was beginning to affect him directly, to pull on his consciousness the way it pulled on his truck's suspension. If he stayed with this load much longer, the weight would crush him, would compress his existence the way it compressed his truck's springs. Raymond called the Dallas delivery facility and told them he was bringing their cargo in early, that he was driving straight through without stopping. He couldn't spend another night in proximity to this weight. He had to deliver it and get away before it consumed him entirely. He drove through the night, his truck barely able to move, the engine screaming in protest as it tried to haul weight that shouldn't exist. Other drivers honked and swerved around him as Raymond crawled along the highway at 40 miles per hour. Unable to go faster, the invisible cargo pulling him down, down, down toward the earth. Raymond reached Dallas just after dawn, his truck limping into the delivery facility on suspension that had been compressed to the bump stops, springs nearly flat, the trailer riding only inches above the pavement. The receiving crew seemed unsurprised by the truck's condition, as if they'd seen other deliveries arrive in similar states. They unloaded the cargo quickly, efficiently, with the same avoidance of eye contact Raymond had seen in New Orleans. And as the final pallet came off his trailer, Raymond felt the weight lift. Not gradually, but instantaneously. His suspension rebounded with a sound like a gunshot. His truck suddenly felt light and responsive, and the oppressive psychic presence that had been crushing him for 24 hours simply vanished. Raymond drove away from that facility and pulled over a mile down the road, shaking with relief. He inspected his truck and found damage consistent with having been severely overloaded: compressed springs, stressed suspension components, unusual wear on tires and brakes. But the scale weight had never exceeded legal limits. The damage had been caused by weight that scales couldn't measure, by cargo that weighed far more in psychic mass than in physical mass. Raymond filed a claim with his insurance for the suspension damage, citing the load as having been improperly secured or documented. The insurance company paid out after their investigation confirmed the unusual wear patterns, though they couldn't explain them. Raymond received enough to repair his truck and compensate him for the haul, though no amount of money felt adequate for what he'd experienced. Raymond never accepted another cargo from that New Orleans warehouse, and he began researching the history of his pickup locations before accepting loads. He discovered that he wasn't alone. Other drivers reported similar experiences when hauling materials salvaged from buildings with dark histories. Scrap from demolished prisons, metals from torn-down hospitals, equipment from closed psychiatric facilities, all of it could carry psychic weight. The accumulated trauma of what had occurred in those places somehow imprinting on the physical materials and creating gravitational presences that affected physical reality, even though they couldn't be measured by conventional means. The weight of invisible cargo was real, Raymond learned, carried by materials that had absorbed decades of suffering and death. And drivers who hauled such materials paid a price. Not just in damaged suspensions and strained engines, but in the psychic burden they absorbed during transport, the weight transferring from cargo to driver, compressing consciousness the way it compressed metal springs. Raymond had delivered his load and escaped that crushing weight, but he knew other drivers weren't as lucky. Some kept hauling such cargo unaware of what they were really carrying, slowly crushed by the accumulating psychic mass until their trucks couldn't move, and their minds couldn't bear the weight anymore, trapped by invisible cargo that wouldn't let them go. Story 6. The convoy that never ended. Mitchell Harper had been driving team hauls with various partners for 12 years, covering the long transcontinental routes that required 2 drivers to maintain legal compliance with hours of service regulations. The 39-year-old from Nevada preferred team driving for the efficiency and the company, enjoying the camaraderie of sharing the cab with another professional driver. On a clear November night in 2019, Mitchell and his partner Carlos Mendez were hauling electronics from San Francisco to Chicago when they fell in behind a convoy of trucks on I-80 through Nevada. The convoy was massive, at least 50 trucks running in formation, and Mitchell and Carlos decided to join them for the crossing through the empty desert. But as the hours passed and the miles accumulated, the convoy showed no signs of breaking up and the drivers showed no signs of stopping. And gradually Mitchell came to realize that this convoy had no destination, no end point, no intention of ever stopping. It was an eternal convoy, drivers trapped in endless forward motion, unable to exit or rest or cease driving, and by joining them, Mitchell and Carlos had been absorbed into a phenomenon that wouldn't release them until they found a way to break free from the perpetual momentum that had captured so many drivers before them. The convoy appeared in Mitchell's headlights around 10 p.m. as he and Carlos approached the empty stretch of I-80 between Reno and Elko. Mitchell was driving while Carlos slept in the bunk, and the sudden appearance of dozens of trucks running in tight formation was both impressive and unusual. Modern trucking had largely abandoned convoys due to electronic logging devices and independent scheduling. So seeing this many trucks running together suggested either an organized event or an unusual coincidence. Mitchell keyed his CB radio. "Breaker 19, this is Nevada Mitchell. I see a large convoy ahead on I-80. You boys on this channel?" A voice responded immediately, friendly and welcoming. 10-4, Nevada Mitchell. This is convoy leader. We're running straight through to Chicago. You're welcome to join up if you're heading east. Safety in numbers, brother. Appreciate that. I'm heading to Chicago as well. Mind if I fall in? Come on in, Nevada. We're always happy to have another driver. The more trucks, the stronger the convoy. Mitchell accelerated slightly and merged into the convoy, positioning his truck in the long line of vehicles. There must have been 60 or 70 trucks now, an impressive show of coordination. The convoy maintained perfect spacing, everyone running at exactly 65 miles per hour. No one speeding up or slowing down, the entire formation moving as a single unit. Carlos woke up around midnight and climbed into the passenger seat, rubbing sleep from his eyes. Damn, that's a lot of trucks. Where'd they all come from? Joined a convoy, Mitchell explained. They're running straight through to Chicago, same as us. Figured we'd run with them for safety. They drove through the Nevada night, the convoy maintaining its formation as the miles passed. After 2 hours, Mitchell was ready to switch with Carlos, to let his partner take a driving shift. But when he tried to slow down to pull over at a rest area, his truck wouldn't respond properly. The accelerator seemed locked at its current position, maintaining exactly 65 miles per hour no matter how much Mitchell pressed or released the pedal. "That's weird," Mitchell muttered, pumping the accelerator with no effect. "The throttle's not responding." Carlos looked concerned. "Try the brake." Mitchell pressed the brake pedal. It went to the floor with no resistance, no effect. The truck continued at exactly 65 miles per hour, perfectly matched to the convoy's speed. Mitchell tried the engine brake, the parking brake, even turned off the cruise control he wasn't using. Nothing changed the truck's speed. "We've got a problem," Mitchell said, trying to keep the panic from his voice. "I can't control our speed. We're locked at 65. Mitchell grabbed his CB. "Convoy leader, this is Nevada Mitchell. I'm having a control issue. My throttle and brakes aren't responding. I can't change speed or pull over." Silence answered him for a long moment. Then the voice came back, and the friendly tone was gone, replaced by something flat and resigned. "Nevada Mitchell, you're part of the convoy now. The convoy doesn't stop. The convoy doesn't slow down. The convoy runs at 65 miles per hour eastbound on I-80 forever. You're one of us now. Welcome to the eternal convoy." "What the hell are you talking about?" Mitchell demanded. "I need to pull over. My partner needs to take his driving shift. We have to stop for fuel eventually." "Check your fuel gauge." Mitchell looked at his dashboard. His fuel gauge showed 3/4 full, exactly what it had shown when he joined the convoy 2 hours earlier. Despite driving over 130 miles at highway speed, he hadn't burned any fuel. The gauge was frozen, or the fuel was being replaced somehow, or Mitchell's mind struggled to accept it. The convoy existed outside normal physics, its trucks running without consuming fuel, without aging, without ever needing to stop. Carlos was staring at the gauge, too. "That's impossible. We should be down to half a tank by now." Mitchell tried steering out of the convoy, turning the wheel hard to the right to exit the formation. But the truck wouldn't respond. The steering was locked, keeping the vehicle perfectly aligned with the convoy's path. Mitchell couldn't exit, couldn't turn, couldn't stop, couldn't even change lanes. He and Carlos were prisoners in their own truck, absorbed into a convoy that would never release them. "This is insane," Carlos said, his voice rising. "We're going to run out of hours. We're going to violate our logs. We'll lose our licenses. Mitchell checked his electronic logging device. The hours weren't advancing. Despite having driven for 2 hours in the convoy, his ELD still showed the same available hours as when he'd joined. Time wasn't passing normally inside the convoy, or rather time was passing, but the trucks and drivers weren't aging, weren't accumulating hours, weren't consuming fuel. They were trapped in a state of perpetual motion, driving forever at 65 miles per hour eastbound on I-80. Mitchell grabbed his CB again. "Convoy leader, you need to explain what's happening. Why can't we leave the convoy?" The voice responded, now sounding tired, ancient. "I've been trying to figure that out for 38 years. Best I can determine, there's some kind of phenomenon on this stretch of I-80. A fold in space or time that traps forward motion. Once you're moving at a certain speed in a certain direction with a certain momentum, you can't stop. The first few trucks that got trapped created a gravitational pull that caught more trucks, and those trucks caught more, and now we're 60-something trucks all trapped together, driving forever, unable to exit or slow down or change direction." 38 years? Mitchell's voice cracked. "You've been driving for 38 years without stopping?" "Since 1981. I was hauling freight from Sacramento to Omaha. Fell in behind what I thought was a normal convoy, and that was it. Trapped. I've driven from Nevada to Nebraska and back thousands of times, the convoy looping on I-80, always heading east until we hit the end of the road and somehow turn around and head west, over and over. Some trucks have been here longer than me. The oldest driver I've talked to says he's been in the convoy since 1967. Carlos had gone pale. We're going to be here for decades, driving forever, unless you can find a way to break free. Some trucks have vanished from the convoy over the years, maybe 15 or 20 in the time I've been here. I don't know if they escaped or if they were destroyed somehow, absorbed into the phenomenon or torn apart by the forces keeping us trapped. But most of us just keep driving year after year, decade after decade, trapped in eternal motion." Mitchell spent the next several hours trying everything he could think of to break free. He tried turning off the ignition. The engine kept running anyway, as if powered by something other than diesel fuel. He tried disconnecting the battery. No effect. He tried to physically damage the truck, breaking controls and smashing gauges, but the convoy seemed to repair damage as quickly as he could cause it, maintaining the trucks in perfect working condition to ensure they could continue driving forever. Carlos tried communicating with other trucks in the convoy, and the responses were heartbreaking. Driver after driver told similar stories. They'd joined what seemed like a normal convoy and found themselves trapped, unable to exit, their trucks locked at 65 miles per hour, doomed to drive I-80 forever. Some had been there for months, some for years, some for decades. All of them had tried to escape and failed. As dawn broke, or what should have been dawn, though the sky seemed permanently twilit inside the convoy's bubble, Mitchell noticed something disturbing. Some of the trucks in the formation looked ancient, models from the 1960s and 70s that should have been in museums or scrapyards. And through the windshields, Mitchell could see drivers who looked wrong. Some appeared ancient, aged far beyond normal human lifespans, while others looked exactly as they must have when they'd been trapped, preserved somehow by the convoy's temporal anomaly. The convoy itself was aging them at different rates, Mitchell realized. Some drivers had experienced subjective decades of driving, aging normally while the outside world moved on. Others seemed suspended, barely aging at all, trapped in the same moment extended infinitely. And Mitchell had no way of knowing which fate would be his and Carlos's. Would they age and die over decades of endless driving? Or would they be frozen at this moment for eternity? On the second day, or what Mitchell's unaltered perception insisted was the second day, though his truck's clock hadn't advanced, Carlos had an idea. What if the trick isn't to stop or turn, but to go faster? What if the trap depends on maintaining exactly 65 miles per hour? Mitchell considered this. We can't control the accelerator to go faster. No, but we can shift gears. The transmission is still responsive. What if we downshift at high RPMs, force the engine to rev beyond normal range? Maybe if we break the speed constraint, we break the trap. Mitchell was desperate enough to try anything. He downshifted from 10th gear to 9th, then to 8th. The engine RPMs climbed, the truck's speed inching above 65, 66, 67, 68 miles per hour. The convoy seemed to resist, some force pulling the truck back toward 65, but Mitchell kept downshifting, pushing the engine harder. At 71 miles per hour, something broke. Not mechanically, but spiritually. Mitchell felt the trap release, felt the invisible bonds holding their truck in formation suddenly snap. Control returned all at once. The throttle responded, the brakes engaged, the steering unlocked. Mitchell immediately slowed down and veered right, pulling off onto the shoulder as the convoy continued past at exactly 65 miles per hour. He brought the truck to a complete stop, the first time it had been motionless in over 30 hours. And he and Carlos sat in stunned silence, watching the convoy disappear into the distance, all those trapped trucks continuing their eternal eastbound journey. Mitchell checked his phone and found that only 6 hours had passed in the outside world, despite the 30-plus hours he and Carlos had subjectively experienced. The convoy existed in a bubble of altered time, and escaping it meant returning to normal temporal flow. They sat on the shoulder for 20 minutes, neither speaking, just processing their escape. Then Mitchell started the engine. It responded normally now, no longer locked to any external force, and carefully drove away from the spot where they'd broken free from the eternal convoy. Mitchell never drove I-80 through Nevada again without extreme caution, never fell in behind any formation of trucks, never responded to CB calls inviting him to join convoys. And he warned other drivers whenever possible about the eternal convoy, the trap that still ran I-80, catching new trucks regularly, absorbing them into the perpetual motion, adding them to the dozens or hundreds of drivers who'd been trapped over the decades. Driving forever at exactly 65 miles per hour, unable to stop or exit or escape. The convoy that never ended, stretching across the Nevada desert in an endless loop of trapped momentum and lost lives. Story 7. The delivery that unmade reality. Samuel Park had been driving specialized freight for quantum computing and advanced physics research facilities for 8 years, transporting highly sensitive equipment that required precise temperature control, minimal vibration, and careful handling. The 33-year-old from Seattle understood that his cargo was often experimental, cutting-edge technology that existed at the boundaries of current scientific understanding. On a hot July afternoon in 2023, Samuel picked up a sealed container from a research laboratory in Los Alamos, New Mexico, with delivery instructions to a facility in Boulder, Colorado. The cargo manifest listed it as experimental quantum substrate, requiring specific transport conditions, but gave no details about what the substrate actually was or what it was designed to do. Over the next 9 hours, Samuel would discover that some experiments succeed too well, creating effects that extend far beyond laboratory walls, and that his cargo had begun to affect reality itself, unmaking physical laws in an expanding sphere around his truck, gradually erasing the fundamental rules that kept existence stable, coherent, and survivable. The pickup protocols were extensive. Samuel had to wear an anti-static suit, ground his truck to discharge any accumulated electrical potential, and allow technicians to seal the container with complex locking mechanisms. The container itself was roughly 3 feet cubic, made of something that looked like brushed titanium but was far lighter than titanium should be. It was placed on a specialized suspension system in Samuel's trailer. Isolated from vibrations, maintained at exactly 68 degrees Fahrenheit, in a precisely controlled microclimate. Do not allow the temperature to vary by more than 1 degree, the head technician told Samuel. Do not expose the container to strong electromagnetic fields. Do not open, inspect, or in any way breach the containment. If you experience any unusual phenomena during transport, call this number immediately. He handed Samuel an emergency contact card with a red border and the word critical stamped across it. What kind of unusual phenomena? Samuel asked. The technician's expression was carefully neutral. Visual distortions, temporal anomalies, apparent violations of physical laws. The substrate can affect local reality if containment is compromised. But the container is designed to prevent such effects. You shouldn't experience anything unusual if you follow protocols exactly. Samuel signed the extensive liability waivers, loaded the cargo, and departed Los Alamos, heading north toward Colorado. The route would take him through Santa Fe, then up Highway 285 through the mountains to Boulder. About 7 hours under normal conditions. For the first 2 hours, everything was normal. Samuel maintained constant speed on the highways, his trailer's climate control system keeping the container at exactly 68 degrees, the specialized suspension absorbing road vibrations. The July heat was intense, but Samuel's truck was running well, and he anticipated completing the delivery before midnight. Then around 5 p.m. somewhere north of Santa Fe, Samuel noticed something odd. The landscape outside his windows was becoming blurry, as if he was looking at it through frosted glass, or as if the landscape itself was losing definition. Samuel blinked and rubbed his eyes, thinking it was fatigue or the glare from the setting sun, but the blurriness didn't clear. If anything, it was getting worse. Samuel pulled over at a rest area to investigate. When he climbed out of his truck, he experienced immediate vertigo. The ground beneath his feet felt unstable, as if solid pavement had become slightly elastic or gelatinous. He took a few steps and found that distance wasn't consistent. One step covered what seemed like 3 feet. The next step covered 6 inches, with no correlation to how far he'd actually moved his leg. Looking around, Samuel saw that the rest area's buildings and structures were distorted, their shapes no longer quite right. A rectangular building had somehow become trapezoidal, its walls bending in directions walls shouldn't be able to bend. A straight line of parking spaces had developed a curve that made Samuel's eyes hurt to follow. Samuel checked his trailer and found the container's temperature gauge reading exactly 68 degrees. Perfect. But the gauge's digital display was showing numbers in a way that made no sense. 68. But the 6 and 8 were overlapping, occupying the same space while remaining distinct, quantum superposition of digits made visible. Something was very wrong. Samuel grabbed the emergency contact card and dialed the number. A woman answered immediately. "This is Dr. Jennifer Walsh, Quantum Containment Emergency Response. Please state your driver ID and current situation." Samuel identified himself and described the phenomena, the blurry landscape, the inconsistent distances, the geometric distortions, the impossible overlapping numbers. Dr. Walsh listened in silence, then swore quietly. "The containment is leaking. Not catastrophically, but enough to create localized reality distortion within about a 100-meter radius of the container. Mr. Park, you need to continue driving. Do not stop. Do not delay. The distortion effects will intensify if the container remains stationary, but they'll remain localized if you keep moving. Get to Boulder as quickly as possible. We'll have a containment team ready. What is this substrate? What did you people create? A quantum material that exists in multiple states simultaneously. It's designed to enable processing power far beyond conventional quantum computers by maintaining coherent superposition across macroscopic scales. But the side effect is that it radiates quantum uncertainty into its surroundings. causing reality itself to become probabilistic rather than deterministic. Physical laws become suggestions rather than rules. Outcomes become multiple rather than singular. You're telling me my cargo is causing reality to break down? Within a limited radius, yes. The containment is designed to prevent this, but it appears to be failing gradually. You need to deliver it to Boulder, where we have equipment to repair or improve the containment. If you stop, if the container remains in one place too long, the distortion sphere will expand and intensify. Eventually, it could cause a permanent reality failure in the affected area, a zone where physics simply doesn't work consistently anymore. Samuel climbed back into his truck, his hands shaking. The cab interior was distorting now, too. His steering wheel looked normal from one angle, but elongated from another. His dashboard lights were colors that didn't exist in normal human perception. The air itself had a grainy texture, like reality was composed of visible pixels. Samuel pulled back onto the highway and drove north, fighting vertigo and nausea as the world around him continued to lose coherence. The road ahead split into multiple versions, one where it curved left, another where it continued straight, a third where it spiraled upward in defiance of gravity. Samuel tried to follow the version that seemed most real, but determining which was real became increasingly difficult as all possibilities became equally present. Other vehicles on the road were affected too. Samuel watched a car pass through multiple states simultaneously. Red and blue and green all at once, new and old, and crashed all in the same moment, containing different numbers of passengers depending on which quantum state he focused on. The driver looked terrified, experiencing their own vehicle's quantum multiplication, their reality fragmenting into possibilities. Samuel called Dr. Walsh again. The distortion is spreading. Other vehicles are being affected. This is bigger than 100 meters now. I know. We're tracking it via satellite. The containment failure is accelerating. Mr. Park, you need to understand something. If you don't reach Boulder in the next 6 hours, if the distortion expands beyond a certain threshold, it will reach a point where we can't contain it anymore. It will keep growing, keep spreading, eventually engulfing cities, states, potentially the entire planet. Your cargo could unmake reality for everyone if we don't get it into proper containment. The weight of responsibility nearly crushed Samuel. He was hauling something that could destroy the world, or at least destroy the consistency of physical laws that made the world comprehensible and survivable. And he had 6 hours to deliver it to the one facility that might be able to contain it. Samuel drove faster, pushing his speed to 80 miles per hour despite the distorted road conditions. The speedometer showed 80, but also 120 and 35 and 200 simultaneously, different quantum states of his velocity, all real at once. His fuel gauge showed full and empty and half and non-existent. His clock displayed 6:47 p.m. and 3:22 a.m. and 11:09 p.m. in symbols that weren't numbers at all. The landscape became nightmare geometry. Mountains bent in loops. The sky was below the horizon. Roads existed in multiple dimensions, simultaneously creating impossible knots of asphalt. Samuel could see into alternate versions of Colorado where different histories had played out, where buildings stood that had never been built in his timeline, where landscapes looked alien despite being geographically identical to his own reality. And the distortion was still expanding. Samuel could see its edge, a spherical boundary perhaps half a mile in radius now, inside which reality was probabilistic and outside which reality remained deterministic. The boundary was moving with his truck, centered on his cargo, and it was growing. Samuel passed through Boulder's outskirts, the distortion sphere engulfing neighborhoods, causing reality failures in homes and businesses. People stumbled out of buildings, their bodies flickering between multiple quantum states, young and old simultaneously, present and absent, alive and dead and undecided. Cars crashed in slow motion, their collisions producing outcomes that violated conservation of momentum and energy, pieces scattering in directions that didn't correspond to the forces involved. Samuel followed GPS coordinates to the delivery facility, though the GPS showed multiple conflicting routes through streets that curved in non-Euclidean geometries. He reached a high-security complex on Boulder's Edge, guards frantically waving him through gates that existed in several states of being open and closed at once. Technicians in specialized suits surrounded Samuel's truck the moment he stopped. They disconnected his trailer with desperate haste and hauled it into a massive containment structure, a building within a building shielded with materials and fields Samuel didn't understand. The moment the trailer crossed the threshold of the containment structure, the distortion sphere stopped expanding. It didn't collapse, but it stabilized, its boundary fixed at roughly a 2-mile radius around the facility. Dr. Walsh appeared, her form flickering between multiple versions of herself. "You did it. The container is in secondary containment now. It'll take hours to repair the primary containment and stabilize the substrate, but you got it here before the distortion became irreversible." "What about all the people affected? The neighborhoods in the distortion sphere?" Samuel demanded. "They'll recover once we stabilize the substrate. Reality will reconverge to a single state. Some people will remember being in multiple states simultaneously. We'll have memories of events that happened in quantum branches that didn't ultimately become real, but they'll be alive, and the physical world will return to normal coherence." Samuel climbed out of his truck on legs that felt like they existed in multiple places at once. He looked at his hands and saw them young and old, scarred and unscarred, present and absent. The distortion was still affecting him, his body unable to decide which quantum state was real. "How long until I reconverge?" Samuel asked, his voice coming out as multiple versions speaking simultaneously. "Hours, maybe days. You were at the epicenter of the distortion for 9 hours. Your quantum state is deeply disrupted, but you'll stabilize. You'll become singular again, it just takes time." Samuel spent 3 days in a medical facility at the Boulder complex, slowly reconverging from multiple quantum states into a single coherent version of himself. The process was disorienting and sometimes painful, as contradictory states resolved themselves and reality decided which version of Samuel Park was the actual one. When he finally emerged, stable and singular, Samuel quit working for quantum research facilities. He couldn't risk hauling another cargo that could unmake reality, couldn't be responsible for transporting experiments that existed at the boundaries of possible and impossible. The delivery that unmade reality had nearly destroyed Boulder, nearly collapsed the consistency of physical laws for millions of people, and Samuel had been the unknowing agent of that near catastrophe. But Samuel knew the experiments would continue. Other drivers would haul other quantum substrates, other experimental materials that challenged the stability of reality itself. And someday, one of those containments would fail completely, one of those drivers wouldn't make it to their destination in time, and the distortion sphere would expand beyond the point of no return, turning entire regions into zones of quantum uncertainty where reality became probabilistic and nothing could be trusted to remain consistent, where the fundamental laws that made existence comprehensible would dissolve into infinite possibility, and where humanity would learn too late that some deliveries should never be made, some cargo should never be created, and some experiments succeed in ways that destroy everything the success was meant to benefit.